So how does a modern-day conflict actually start? It's rarely a big, grand declaration of war anymore. Instead, it's usually just a single spark, an incident that suddenly spirals out of control. So today, we're going to deconstruct that. We're going to break down how a crisis can ignite, escalate, and then just maybe pull back from the brink, using a fictional but totally plausible scenario as our guide.
And this right here, this sentence is really the heart of everything we're talking about. It's the central problem, that tension that every leader, every diplomat, every soldier on the ground has to deal with when a crisis erupts. It's the force that just keeps pushing events forward, a lot of the time against the better judgment of literally everyone involved. Okay, so this is the big question we're trying to answer. We're not just looking at what happens, but really digging into why it happens. We're going to examine the anatomy of this near-miss conflict, piece by piece, to really get a handle on the mechanics of a modern showdown.
Right. Every conflict kicks off with some kind of event. But here's the thing. It's not the event itself that's the most important part. It's how each side sees it, how they interpret it. The action might be a fact, but the story you tell yourself about that fact, well, that's what can lead to war.
And here it is. This is our spark. Imagine it's 2 in the morning, and this incredibly sophisticated, very expensive piece of military hardware is just blasted out of the sky. Now, from a purely military view, it's a tactical event. But geopolitically, it's like throwing a lit match into a room full of gasoline.
And this is where things get really, really messy. Almost instantly. You have two totally different, irreconcilable truths. For Washington, it's simple. The drone was in international airspace, period. This was an unprovoked, deliberate act of aggression. But for Tehran, they say the drone crossed a defensive line, and their forces were just following standing orders. You see what's happening? Each side sees themselves as the victim, just reacting to the other side's aggression.
There's actually a term for this. Experts call it the security dilemma, and this is a textbook example. Think about it. The US puts a carrier group, basically a floating fortress, in the Gulf to feel more secure. Iran sees this as an enemy surrounding them, so they move missile batteries to their coast to feel more secure. Each move, meant to be defensive, looks totally offensive to the other side. It creates this dangerous spiral where nobody feels any safer. In fact, everyone feels way more threatened.
But here's what's so interesting. The first instinct on both sides isn't to immediately go to all-out war. Both leaders actually hit the brakes. The US president says, hold on, no retaliation yet, demanding proof, buying himself precious time. And the Iranian supreme leader advises calm strength, basically telling his commanders to stand down. It's this really crucial, calculated pause.
Of course, a pause like that can't last forever. The pressure starts to build, Both sides feel like they have to do something. And that brings us to this idea of the escalation ladder. Each rung you climb is a more forceful action, which pretty much forces the other guy to climb a rung in response.
So let's walk through it step by step. Step 1 is the incident itself, the drone shoot-down. In response, the US climbs to Step 2. They launch a very limited, very precise strike on the radar site that guided the missile. It's a direct tit-for-tat move. But now, the ball is in Iran's court, and they feel forced to respond, climbing to Step 3 with their own missile strike on a US base. And from the perspective of the side taking each step, it all feels completely logical and necessary.
Now, you've got to understand the thinking behind the US move here. The order is precision only. This isn't about starting a war, it's what strategists call violent communication. They're sending a message, and that message is, hey, we can hit you. We know exactly where you are. We're choosing to show restraint this time, but don't do it again.
And what's just incredible is that Iran gets that violent message and sends one right back in the exact same language. The supreme leader's order is to respond proportionally, but to leave room for silence. So they target a US base, but they deliberately aim for empty storage depots to avoid killing anyone. The message is just as clear. We can hit you too. We're not scared, but we're also not looking for a total war.
But, for the actual people on the ground, all these careful strategic calculations mean absolutely nothing. When American missiles start hitting your base, the political nuance kind of goes out the window. For Colonel Rashidi, sitting in his bunker as the ground shakes from the impact, his conclusion is simple, and it's stark. This is war.
Okay, so let's zoom out from the battlefield for a second and step inside the pressure cooker, the rooms where these life or death decisions are being made. Because in here, the pressure is just immense. The information is never perfect, and the advice you're getting is dangerously contradictory.
Over in Washington, you can just imagine the hawks in the room making their case.
They see a clear pattern. First the drone, now this. From where they're sitting, restraint is just being seen as weakness, and they think a much stronger response is needed to show they're serious.
And then halfway across the world in Tehran, it's the exact same conversation, just in reverse. It's a perfect mirror image. The hardliners there don't see the U.S. precision strike as some kind of limited signal. No, they see it as the first step of a full-scale invasion. They're arguing that if they don't hit back hard now, the next American strike is going to be on their capital. So you see the impossible position these leaders are in, right? On one shoulder, you have hawks screaming for action. On the other, you have doves begging for caution. You're staring at these grainy satellite photos, trying to guess what the other guy is thinking. Are those missiles moving into an attack position or a defensive one? And looming over every single thought is this double-edged fear. If I don't act, I'll look weak, but if I overreact, I could trigger an absolute catastrophe. So as the military options get more and more dangerous, the whole focus starts to shift. Both sides begin to realize they are one bad decision away from a war that nobody actually wants. Suddenly, the most important mission isn't winning the fight, it's finding a way out, an off-ramp.
And where do they find it? Not on TV, that's for sure. Not in some fiery speech at the UN. They find it in quiet, deniable talks, maybe in a hotel suite in Geneva, through a third party. When you're posturing in public, you can't afford to look soft, so a secret back channel is the only place you can have a real conversation, far, far away from the cameras.
And in these secret meetings, the language is, well, it's brutally honest. There is no room for misinterpretation. The Iranian envoy just lays out a crystal clear red line. It's not even really a threat. It's more like a statement of fact, a promise of consequences. It helps both sides understand exactly what's at stake.
And this is what they hammer out. A really carefully built set of actions where each side gives a little something. The U.S. agrees to pull its aircraft carrier back a bit, but they get to call it a routine rotation in public so they save face. In return, Iran agrees to stand down its missile crews. See? Neither side has to admit they back down, but both sides take a real concrete step away from the brink.
Okay, so a deal is made. The world breathes a collective sigh of relief. But is the crisis actually over? Or is it just paused? Well, the answer to that really depends on who you ask. And this quote from Colonel Rashidi, man, it just brings it all back down to earth, to the human cost. While the politicians in their capital cities are celebrating a diplomatic win, the soldiers who were minutes away from fighting and maybe dying are left to think about just how close they really came. I mean, just look at the difference in perspective here. You've got the American captain watching his ships move away, and his assessment is pragmatic, it's in the present tense, it's paused. But his Iranian counterpart, he takes this much longer, much more cynical view. Wars rarely end, they just wait. He gets it. He knows that the real problems, the underlying tensions, they haven't been solved at all. The fire has been contained, yeah, but the embers are still glowing.
And that leaves us with this one final, pretty unsettling question. Because de-escalation is not the same thing as resolution. It's a temporary truce, when all the fundamental disagreements and fears and security dilemmas are still there. The real challenge isn't just stopping the crisis you're in, it's figuring out how to stop the next one from ever starting.